Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the 50 Cent Tour. I'm Pete James, and with me today is a very special man I've known for quite a few years, Mr. Ralph Hastings. Ralph, how you doing?
Fine. Happy to be here, Pete.
Well, folks, it was inevitable, but I finally made it to the Poor Farm. And that's what we're going to take you on the tour today with. We are at the Lincoln County Poor Farm. And Ralph, give us a little intro about what we're going to see today.
We're right in front of the main house where the manager and his family lived. And this house has been here a long time. I don't know how long it's been, longer than I can remember. Straight in front of us was the barn. It was a huge barn. It's gone now. And straight in front of us to the left was hog lots where they fattened the hogs. We killed about 40 to 50 hogs here every year. And the hills, they would have been turned. What we were going to plant in corn, they would have been turned, most of them by now, or working on that if the weather had been suitable, because these hills were all worked with mules and corn was raised on the hills. Now there was a flat land back across one of the hills here in front of us that was usually raised wheat where they could get flour, but much corn was needed for all the livestock and the hogs that were killed and all.
Now, Ralph, who ended up on the Poor Farm, and when did the Poor Farm come into being, and when did it finish?
I believe the Poor Farm was bought in 1876. Now, the first manager, I'd have to look, I don't know, but I know when I was first acquainted with it, when I was a small boy, my uncle lived here as long as I could remember, and I visited here off and on all my life, Elliot Carter. And he stayed here till 1940, and after I graduated from high school, I worked here as foreman 2 years till I went in the Army. And he left here then. He bought a farm down at Coldwater, and different ones were managers after that. Of course, well, now before that, the Hicks and the Hayes and the Moore. After that, another Carter, a cousin of mine, was a manager, and Honis and Sheffield. Well, they had several, and it closed in it was sold at public sale down here in 1961. I attended it right out in front of where we're standing.
Who actually lived on the Poor Farm?
People that couldn't make a living for themselves and the families couldn't care for them. It could be many reasons why they were here, because of health, because of their mind, their mental facilities, financial, many reasons why the people were here.
So kind of like an early version of a nursing home.
It was, and it was much different though. The people felt a need, after they got here, a need to try to maintain the farm and try to work to help make a living and all, and everybody helped and everybody had a job. If you couldn't do anything but shuck corn, you could go over to the barn and do that.
Sounds like a vanishing ethic, doesn't it?
It is, but they were a proud group after they got here and fit into the family. They were just a family here.
Well, folks, we're going to ask Ralph to show us around and tell us some of the great stories and some of the memories he has from the Lincoln County Poor Farm here. Was there another name for it, or is that what everybody
That was it. That was it, Lincoln County Poor Farm.
Well, stay with us. It's the 50 Cent Tour, and you're along with it today for the Lincoln County Poor Farm.
Pete, this rock wall was built here in front of the house in the 30s. Before that, the two rock, as you enter here, were in a big stile block where men and women got on the horses right over beside us here. And there were three of those rocks, and these two at the entrance and one down at the corner were the three that composed the stile block that you got up on the horses. And that was fancy to have a big rock like that. Not everyone had rock, and I don't know who put them here, but they were here as long as I could remember, but it was nice, and most people would like to have had them because it was easy for women to get up and get on a side saddle off of a stile block.
How about that? So that's what they used to get up on the horses with.
These three rock, these two and one more.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, tell us something about the old house, Ralph.
The house is, the front part of it is, of course, the living quarters. You have two fireplaces, one for the where the family stayed, and it was a bedroom back then. It wasn't a den. They didn't have dens back then. But in the right-hand side, the fireplace was for the parlor. That you didn't stay in there very often, but unless you had company, you went in there. But then on back, the back part of the house, of course, is where all the cooking was done. There was a huge kitchen back there, and before you get to the kitchen was the dining room where the manager and his family ate, and on the two dining rooms back of the kitchen, one was for the whites and one's for the black. And they rang a bell before every meal 3 times a day, and they came down and ate. A lot of cooking went on in the kitchen. The fire was in that stove from early morning till all afternoon, you might say.
Well, let's go see that.
All right. Good, good. That's fine. Pete, the kitchen is the back part of the house now. Now, the 2 dining rooms have been torn down. They extended off of the back of the house here and had a porch off of those. A porch that went all the way across. And they went into 2 back rooms, and they had 2 doors that led into the kitchen. And all of the food was brought into the rooms. They had a dinner bell right here on top of this wall that had a rope extended down to the back porch. When they got ready, well, they pulled the rope and rang the bell for everyone to come to eat.
Now, somebody lives here right now.
Yeah, yes. One of the ancestors of one of the former managers, Bill Carter Jr. lives here now. He and his family, his wife and 2 daughters live here.
We sure appreciate them letting us nose around here, but we're not going to go inside and disturb their life.
No, they wouldn't mind it. They would be happy for us to go in, but I don't think that's necessary. And but we're missing all of the buildings back here. There were
what used to be back here?
Well, we had 2 huge smokehouses back here, 2 huge smokehouses where all the meat was kept. Then we had 2 chicken houses back here. And on above us to my right, back up through the hollow here, was where we made molasses. Had a molasses mill there. And I suppose we made about 200 gallons of molasses a year back there, enough to feed the people for an entire year. And a lot of molasses were made there. The houses over here, if you want to mention those, the larger house right in front of us was where the white people stayed. There was, as you can see, there are 2 doors. The one on the right, there's a partition in there, and the one on the right was a hallway and rooms all the way back, and men stayed on this side and women on the other side. And the next building up above us, that was kind of family type house, and the black people stayed there. It was a nice house at that time, a real nice house, and they were well taken care of, and so they lived right here close together. And the block building, that has been remodeled to below this building where the white people stayed, was the wash house, and it was a really fancy wash house where all the clothes were washed, and had up on a platform of concrete was pots where they boiled the clothes out and all.
Now, Ralph, you say the men and the women stayed in different sides. Were they allowed to have relations?
If we had a man and wife, of course they could stay together, but you didn't have that very much here. You didn't have that very much. If you had a family, they usually stayed together somewhere else. They didn't come here.
Can we go in those buildings, or at least get a little closer?
Yeah,
Right.
yes, we can go in.
Let's do it.
All right. We'll ease around here and just see what we have. Into the women's side of the white people's building here. This is the women's side. And we see you have rooms here on our left all the way back, and right about halfway back was a big stove that heated the entire half of the house. And on the other side, we men had a stove that heated their side. And it would be warm here. It was well built, and it was warm. But as you...
Describe some of the people who used to live here, and were they happy? And maybe tell us a story or two about some of the folks you remember.
They were happy. I remember the first one that comes into mind was Fanny. I won't call her last name. Her mind wasn't too well, but she was brought here at a fairly early age and stayed here. But I guess I was in the service when she died. But she stayed here, and she really liked to dress up on Sunday, and it's the first person that I ever saw with pierced ears. And she had little gold earrings that she had put in her ears on Sunday, and then through the week, while she'd take straws out of her broom and put in their ears where they wouldn't close, so she could put her rings back in the next Sunday. Then, of course, we had Sue and Georgia and different ones I won't call last name. People might recognize and think that, you know, I'm trying to bring in a family or something like that, which I don't want to do because, but I remember all the people here, and yeah, they were fine people, and whatever they were able to do, they did. If they were able to cook, they cooked. They helped my aunt down at the house, and she supervised all of it. She was really a worker and all, and so, and those that were able to washing had to go on 3 or 4 days a week, and some of them helped with the washing down here at the wash house, and then later on in the summer, some helped in the garden, and some actually helped in the field some when they got behind. Some of the women would help in the fields with the pulling weeds or hoeing out weeds out of the corn and cotton, such as that.
Sounds like a working farm.
It was. Yeah, it made its way. It made its way in the county. I don't believe the county had to supplement this much. In fact, money was turned into the county from this farm. I know when my uncle was here, he sold hogs every year, fattened extra hogs and sold and turned the money into the county, and all of the cattle that were raised, 2-year-old steers and heifers were sold. All that was turned into the county.
So it almost made a profit.
Well, it did. It paid its own way, I'll say that.
Well, that's the most you can hope for when you're trying to help folks over the road.
Can you see all the way back? Now, this little partition has been put back here.
Take us back in.
All right, we'll just walk on back there and see. But you can see it was a long building and all. And well, the rooms, I guess they've made some plans here to do something else here. I don't know what the plans were, but they've torn down the partition for the rooms here.
Now, all the ladies used to stay in here.
Yeah, this was the ladies' side.
What do you suppose they were talking about late night?
Well, they'd stay out here around the stove, but they had a big time. It was like a family. They didn't fuss much or anything like that. Yeah, they enjoyed themselves. Just like a family. Most of them had missed it at home or wherever they were raised. They hadn't had much of a family, and so they really fit in. They really fit in, and it was a good life for them.
Now, we're in the community of Coldwater.
Well, Yukon, between Yukon and Coldwater.
All right.
Closer to Yukon. And Prosperity Church is about the 1.5 miles up the road, and they always said when you got to the Poor Farm, you were just below Prosperity.
Well, there's some hope, huh?
That was one consolation. You weren't far from Prosperity. And it's still in existence, a fine church up there. And it was a good church, and now the preacher used to come down here. They had services here on Sunday afternoon a lot of times, and when the weather was suitable, where they could all get out on the porch. And
was it any certain denomination, or was much paid attention to that?
No, didn't pay any attention to the denomination, just read out of the Bible. The Bible fit all of them, and so didn't pay any attention to the denomination. They never was mentioned, the denomination. Now, Pete, we're on the men's side now, and they had a petition that was boarded up on both sides, and it, of course, made it warmer in here, and the men stayed out in this hall in wintertime, and the women over there, and right the second door was the shower. Now, they didn't have indoor facilities and all, but the shower, and that was, of course, that was something not many people at that time had in their homes, but that was on this side, but they all used it. The different people, they made arrangements when the women were supposed to be in here, and when the blacks and white men, and so they all used the shower. And that was mighty good at that time, because not many houses had running water in the country at that time. But the water came from up, they had a big reservoir, a spring up on the hill here, and he kept that reservoir full all the time. It had plenty of pressure and had plenty of water. Now, water was out here in front of the buildings out of hydrants, but this was the only building that had any water inside the building.
Ralph, you talk a lot about the separation of blacks and whites. That sounds foreign today, but that seemed to really cause a lot more preparation back then.
That's right. People didn't think anything about it. Nobody was abused or anything like that. It was just a natural occurrence back then, and they were all treated the same, no matter whether you women or men, black or white. They were all treated the same.
But they just felt the need to separate.
Well, that was just the custom back then. That was the custom. And
now, what year are we talking about right about now?
We're talking about, well, I was here from, well, off and on from in the 20s till 1940. I was here off and on from in the 20s to 1940. I worked here 1940 and 41 as foreman. 2 years here as foreman on this farm, and went to the fields carried all the people to the fields that were able to go, and whatever we needed to do, I was the foreman. My uncle was the manager, and it was a good life. It was a good life, and you did make a lot of money back then. The pay was $30 a month, and that was better than I did when I went in the Army. They paid me $21 then.
What did people do on a Friday night around here?
Well, you didn't think anything about Friday night. It was Saturday nights. We'd try to go to town if we could, but no, we didn't all the time. But now when we were just boys growing up, Friday nights during school year and all, they didn't let us possum hunt much back school nights, but then on Friday night, we really hit the woods on Friday night with with the possum dogs.
What'd you do with the possum once you got them?
That was about the only thing that we could keep the total profit of. Now, whatever we sold furs, why, nobody shared in that at all. We got to keep that.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's go out and show us some more.
Fine, fine. Yeah. Yes, sir. All right, Pete, now we're up at the where the black people stayed, and you can see the steps over there, the rock and concrete steps, had a nice entrance there. And they had some mighty good people. I remember one person in particular, and I'll call his whole name Uncle Bud Bonner. He had a well-traveled man, black man. He'd been on the Pullman train a lot in his life, and he'd traveled all over the United States more than most people around here. You know, not many people had ever been to different parts of the United States. But he had a stroke, and it paralyzed him to a certain extent, but he still would go to the barn and take care of the riding horses and such as that for us. But he had a lot of pride, and always just a fine-looking man. He's just a fine-looking man. And then John, I'll mention one other man here. John was a worker, and he didn't plow or anything like that, but he cut wood. We had certain men that cut wood. It took an enormous amount of wood to keep the fire in the kitchen stove all day, and then in the wintertime to keep wood in all the stoves. And John was one of the people that used a saw and axe and all. But he was still here when the farm closed, and he went to the nursing home and stayed up there till he died about 2 or 3 years ago.
Now, how much land was involved out here?
At this particular farm, 279 acres. Now, later on, they bought 2 more little tracts of land, one down the road here about 1.5 miles, what they called a pepper place, and I think it had about 75 to 80 acres in it. And on down on Coldwater Creek, they bought 3 bottoms down there. I believe that was in the 30s. And of course that helped a lot in producing wheat, because this land up here, you didn't have enough level land to raise much wheat. So that helped a lot by getting that bottom land. And then of course what we didn't put in wheat down there while we raised corn, and you could have, well, it's better land. This land had been farmed so much, and some of the hills were eroding, and they need to be rested more. At that time you didn't have fertilizer, and so they need to be rested more. So those bottoms helped a lot down there when they got those.
Was there ever any children born into the poor farm?
Yeah, very few, and a few came here, were brought here with maybe their mother or something, but usually some of the family would come and take the child or something.
How long was the average stay here, Ralph?
when they came here, they usually died here.
Wow.
When they came here, they usually died here. They stayed till they died, and that could range anywhere from a year to 50 years. Some of them stayed a long time, and some of them, you know, weren't too far from death when they came here. They were sick when they came, but the family couldn't take care of them, and so they'd bring them here.
Now, is it true there's an old cemetery on this?
Yes, yes. Across in front of the house, about 500 yards on the hill over there, the cemetery, and limestone rocks were put up over there.
Does it still exist?
It's still there, but no name is on any grave over there. And I suppose as many as 100 people maybe were buried over there, but there's no name on any grave. Pete, we're out at the spring now, the spring house. They have restored the house, and of course they've the original rock on down in there. They replaced a few of the rock up at the top, but on back in the spring house, you can see back in there, and that's where all the milk was kept. Of course, you didn't have refrigeration back then, and all the milk and butter was kept there in the spring house. And there's a trough back in there of water running down through there, and it seemed very cold back then. I don't think it seemed as cold now since we have ice and all, but it was plenty cold back then, and all the milk was brought out here, and drinking water was got because it was colder than that came from the reservoir up on top of the hill. But they've done a good job of restoring this building. Bill Carter had it done, and it's not as large as the original was, but they kept potatoes and onions and such as that in there and let them dry, and the other building, it extended on out over here. It was a larger building, but you can see how valuable this spring was in preserving milk and butter.
So it was like an oversized refrigerator.
It was. That was your refrigerator back then.
Was this before ice houses and ice boxes?
Yeah. Well, it was. Well, of course, you could buy ice in town, but this was far from town. You weren't up there every day, not by any means, and even every week, and so you didn't have too much ice back then. And
Ralph, I always wondered, how did they make ice back then?
They had an ice house there in Fayetteville. And I've been there, but I can't tell you the procedure. Of course, I bought ice there many times when I was growing up. But
boy, and now we have automatic ice makers. Boy, what they would have given for some of those.
Oh, yes, you don't. But back here, right between here and the house, you can't imagine the pile of wood there where they kept what we call stove wood for the kitchen stove. And it would be high. You could drive up with a wagon, and of course, you pitched wood up then, and I've seen it just high as you could pitch wood up. That's that much wood there for the stove in the kitchen. It took an enormous amount of wood. And a lot of the hills, well, some of the hills were cleaned off, and some of them have grown back to a certain extent that you can see now, since they don't cultivate them anymore, just more or less bush hog them. But the big smoke houses back here in the garden right above us was a good garden, but there were a lot of houses back here, a lot of smoke houses, chicken houses, and very small houses back here. Pete, you'll see a trough like where water comes down in there, and that's where the milk and butter was kept, and it was kept well. And you had to have such as that in the summertime to keep milk and all, and of course where you could make butter. But it was mighty handy to have a spring house like this, and cool water running down through there. Yeah, it was mighty good, and we were fortunate here at this farm to have several things. Not all farms had things like this. Not all farms had spring houses and good springs and all. Of course, not all farms had steep hills either, but there were many steep hills around here. But
tell me about some of the people who used to walk these stairs.
Well, there were a lot of women, and mostly that came out and got water and brought the milk out here and all. Sue and Ida and all different ones. I'd have to do a little thinking to call more names, but I know the names of them, and I'd have to do Bertie and May and some of the others, but they were very good for their jobs and all. And
Ralph, how would you compare life in general back then to life today?
well, life back then was slow, but we weren't, you know, we had more time to, I believe, to really enjoy. We didn't have television. Maybe a radio came along back while we were here, but and maybe a little before. But you had time to enjoy things more back then. You didn't have the rush you had now. You didn't have a meeting to attend, you know, 2 or 3 times a day and night. And you could enjoy the family and people and all. You just tried to find something to do instead of trying to find something to get out of. Yeah. Pete, across the fence here, you can still see a few rocks down there in the green left over there. That's where the jail was. And I don't know how long the jail had been built before I could remember, but the jail was, you know, had wrought iron cells and wrought iron doors, not wrought iron, iron bars, doors and all. And so it had 10 or 12 cells in there. It wasn't used much in my memory, except one time during the Depression. They brought some of the people from Central State that the county was having to pay for, and times got so hard they couldn't afford to pay, and they brought those people here, and they had to keep those down there for a while. And then later on, you asked about a family before. I do remember a family that they brought the man and his wife and children here. They were all, children were grown, but they were afflicted, and they lived down there in the jail. And one jail cell contained caskets. We kept caskets. I say we, my uncle. I didn't, but I'm including we too much, I guess. But the county sent caskets down here, and they were kept on hand at all times in that cell when people died. They were buried on the hill over here. Pete, what we're looking at now is the base for the foot log that we crossed and went over to the barn. Of course, as you can see, the barn is gone, no longer there, but there was a long log that extended across there, and of course it was flattened on top with axes and all, and where you could walk it, and had a wire rail from the post. The wire or rail went from post to post across here, where you had something to hold to. The people that, you know, couldn't balance themselves too well, you could hold to the wire rail as you went across. But usually the water was going down a little too wide to jump or step across, so you had to walk the foot log.
And they were heading back towards the barn, and what were they doing back there?
Well, that's where all of the horses and mules were kept. That's where all the cattle were kept at night. At that time, you felt like you had to put cattle up. Now you don't, but then kept cattle in huge sheds back there, and of course with milk back there too. Of course, all the corn was back there in the cribs and the hay in the loft and everything, and of course a lot of activity that went on there at the barn. There's a piece of cable there, and that.
Folks used to hold on to that.
Yeah. That's a piece of the cable that went from post to post that people held on to going across. I wanted to try to find where limestone rocks were still up, if I could.
Now, what are you looking for, Ralph?
I'm looking for some of the graves in here, that sunken places, and maybe some limestone rocks that might still be standing. We're in the general area now where the cemetery was, and it, of course, hadn't been even cut off, looks like, in several years. But we're in the area now where the cemetery is, or where it was. And I think it's just so grown up, it's hard to see, but we'll find. Let me see. Let me go right around this way, Pete. Pete, we're in the vicinity of the old cemetery here now, and the last time I was here, and you can tell that it's been a few years, of course they quit bush hogging this, I guess, and it's unkept now. You can't even get through there, and you can't see any stones or anything from here because it's grown up. But there should be some limestone rock, several of them standing, or maybe fallen over by now in there. But there were a lot of people buried here, and I told about a fellow that they caught here in the county many years ago, about 1919 or 20, up at Mimosa, and they brought him down here. They never knew where he came from, and they named him Tony Dago. I don't know why, but he's a very curious fellow, and I don't know whether he was an Indian. There are various thoughts about how he got here. Some thought maybe he could have been a prisoner of war or something, got loose after World War I, but nobody ever knows, or ever will know. But anyway, he got killed right over to my right over here. They were sawing wood. Oh, the chestnut blight had come through here and killed all the chestnuts, and there were three little poles of chestnut, or little trees over there, and they were all dead, and the saw hands had sawed two of them down, and he was sitting on the stump and pulling his side of the saw, and no one was up here, just the saw hands. The foreman at that time was, I believe, Tom Cunningham, and he was in the fields plowing, getting ready for crops and all. And so just the men with the saw, and of course that last chestnut tree, they didn't notch it in front or anything, and they sawed from behind, and it split off way up in there 20 or 30 feet and came down on him sitting on that stump that they'd already cut, and it killed him. And he was buried here, but of course there's no rock or anything. Nobody would ever know where or anything about it. And of course that's the same way with everybody that was buried here. There's no identification to identify anybody that was buried here. But there were many people buried here. Now, not all that died were buried here. Some of the families would come and take their relatives back to their own cemeteries, but many of them were buried here. Pete, we're looking across the hollow here, kind of in the back to the side of the main house, and as you can see to our left is a huge hill there, and that was worked, and it's worked too much. It nearly washed away. You can see the drains in there, and of course they've been filled in, and it was worked nearly too much, and then we had to let it go there for many years, and then on around in the hollow, and of course that carries you on up onto the ridge there, and then on around to the right. You can see the hills over there, and that's about as steep a part as you have on the farm here, but we've worked that in corn. And up on top, that that land up there, that field belonged to the county farm here, a poor farm, and of course we could raise wheat up there because it was level where you could use a binder to cut it with and all. But we didn't have too many places where you could raise wheat here because you couldn't cut it. And of course we had gotten by the old scythe and all. In my day and time, we'd gotten where you cut it with binders. Later on, they got combines, but at that time, we didn't have anything but binders to cut it with, and of course, you couldn't cut on a steep hill.
When those tractors came around, that was good news for y'all.
that was good news. That let the hills rest. That let the hills rest. About all you need to tractor far back on the hill is to bush hog and keep it clean, and it's been its worth there. The hills have rested up. They were washed and never should have been worked as much as they were, because we didn't have, as I said before, didn't have fertilizer back then, and you had to rest them. You had to leave them out and let them grow up in weeds a year or two and then put them back after you worked them. Let them kind of amend the soil themselves. Whoa, boy, whoa, whoa, boy, whoa, 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 boy, whoa, whoa, boy, whoa, whoa. Come here, boy.
Got a friend there, Ralph?
I believe so. I believe he'd come to you for a little. Yeah, I believe he'd come to you for a little bit.
You want the freebie, huh?
Yeah, Pete, we might mention the people we haven't mentioned about their clothing and all, of course, they were furnished the clothing and kept in good, the men, overalls and jumpers and all, and they were kept clean, and the women were made dresses. My aunt saw that they had good dresses and all. The men didn't receive maybe a little money when they went to the store or something like that, but they were furnished chewing tobacco, and that was handed out twice a week, and they didn't allow smoking on account of the wooden buildings in the barn and all, but they didn't allow men to smoke. But they were furnished chewing tobacco, and that was handed out twice a week.
A staple of the diet, huh?
That's right, that's right.
What was an average supper like, Ralph?
Oh, it usually had a meat and bread and some one or two vegetables, and molasses was kept on the table at all times. Of course, that was good food, and you know, it furnished the sweets and all. Any pie that was left over from lunch, that might have been eaten at night, but molasses was eaten in the morning and at night both, I guess. That was very good food. All right, Pete, we're on the front porch now, and we're looking out and a different view from where we've seen before. We've seen behind the house and all, and in front, the buildings that I can think of that existed back then, of course, starting with the garage where the car was kept, and the shop by it where we worked on tools. Then we had a scales down here with a tool shop beside it where we weighed, where you could weigh livestock, and then the jail, of course, and across the branch over there was where the hogs were killed. Of course, the scalding box and the rock foundation and all that you built a fire there. The hog pen right back of it, and hog houses and all strewn out back up in there, and then the big barn. And up and down the road, you can see there was one way in and one way out, and that was it. And this was just an existence just back in here. You were almost isolated. You just in here by yourself and with the people, and it was just an enjoyment. The people that lived here, after they once became acclimated and all, I think they were a lot better off than where they had lived before, because they were appreciated here, and I think they enjoyed living here and being a part of the big family that lived here. So it's meant a lot to a lot of people throughout the years, and it just was a good place. It was just a good place.
Well, Ralph, we sure appreciate you bringing us out here on the 50-cent tour. This was a nice 50-cent tour.
Well, I've enjoyed it, I guess, as much or more than you have. I always like to come back down in this section of the county. A lot of history here to me, and of course my people lived here, my uncle and aunt. They were some of the best people for this job that could have been found in the world. I don't think any other couple in Lincoln County or in Tennessee or anywhere else could have been found that would have had a better life with the people here. They tried to treat all the people right, keep them clean, and keep them well housed, well clothed and all.
Well, you know, I know that this was called the Poor Farm, but to be very honest with you, I don't think a lot of working people out there right now have it as nice.
That was a name that we had to live with, as far as, and maybe people joked about it a little bit, but as far as the life here, it wasn't poor by any means. It wasn't poor by any means. The people had a good living here.
Well, folks, this has been the 50-cent tour, and we're living good once again right here in Lincoln County. We're somewhere between Yukon and Coldwater. Now, you have something very special. This place is going to be officially recognized by the state. Tell us about that.
Last fall, I went before the Historical Commission asking them to back me on this project, and of course the Carters, Bill Carter and family are backing me too. They're helping, and a lot of other people are. But I wanted to get an historical marker put up down here, and it has to go through the legislature. And so I called Mr. Phillips and Mr. Cooper and all our senator and representative. They have presented it to the Senate, to the House, and it has passed both of them. Now, as I understand it, it will cost in the neighborhood of $1,500. And another thing that we're hoping to move down here, we have some rock up at Mulberry, some big rock that came out of a bridge. You people from Mulberry will know where the bridge is to the right of, after you pass through Mulberry. The rock they were planning to bring down here and build a pyramid type thing, not too high, maybe 6 or 7 foot tall, will go in front of this historical marker. And they'll be about, well, 7 or 8 feet long and 14 to 6 inches through the width and the height and all. And I think it'll all be very good to remember this place with.
That's great. And we're going to be out here for that a little later on as they bring that marker out here. I guess it'll be a dedication ceremony.
I would think so. I'd think Mr. Phillips and Mr. Cooper would want to be down for that. I'm sure there will be. I'm sure there will be.
Well, they'll be down, and we'll be down too. We'll be back with the 50-cent tour, but for now, I think I'm just going to sit here with Mr. Ralph Hastings on the porch of an old farm with a lot of rich history here in Lincoln County. And you know, Ralph, it kind of makes you want to get some chewing tobacco.
It really does. You can't get much more relaxing and much more relaxation than this in the sun and in the front porch where you can see the shade trees where the leaves will put out shortly. And this is the original trees in this yard, and they've been here as long as I can remember, and that's a good little while.
Ralph, thank you very much for taking us on the tour today.
Thank you, Pete. I've enjoyed it.
That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the 50-cent tour. We're at the Lincoln County Poor Farm, and I think it's been the richest place I've been to in quite a while. Thanks again, Ralph.
Good. Thank you, Pete.